I have a long story to tell. I was born in Constantia, as I said, not very far from here. And I think I was about, my mother says 3, but she always used to exaggerate, so I think probably 4. And she put me on a pony. She taught me to ride, and from there I used to go hunting with her and that sort of thing. Funnily enough, when I was 6, I went on a hunt with her. Anyway, we were galloping along. We came to this river, and it was very steep, and it had been raining. And we were sort of towards the back of the hunt, and my mother's horse went down, and it slipped and it fell, sort of into the river. The river wasn't very deep, but sort of into the river as it was trying to scramble up the bank on the other side. I went down the bank, up the other side. I turned around and said, "Ma, you okay?" Because I'm carrying on, and off I went with the hunt. So that was sort of my first recollection of doing anything, sort of note. And I used to go to gymkhanas, and we used to have wonderful gymkhanas out at Stellenbosch and in Darling and places like that. Amazing, amazing gymkhanas. Then I think I was probably about 8, somewhere around there. That Charlotte Kroll-Rees in those days, the late Charlotte Stubbs. She was married to David Stubbs, who was a Springbok showjumper. She came out to this country with her parents, and she started a riding school just not very far from here either. The council objected to the stables, and so all her horses were chucked out of the stables. So we had a small farm called Nahoon. It was 30 acres. So my mother, I don't know how she and Charlotte met up. Knowing Charlotte, she probably walked into my mother's house and said, "You've got some sheds and things here. Would you keep the chickens in, get rid of the chickens and put my horses in it?" So anyway, so we had her horses for a while. I don't know for how long. We had her horses for a while until her stables were authorized, and then she went took the horses back. In the meantime, my mother said, "I want you to give this child some lessons." So Charlotte started giving me lessons. Then the Rosebank show, the Western Province Agriculture Show, which was held in Rosebank, which was actually just below where the university is now. So on the opposite side of the front of the university, on the opposite side of the road, slightly down there. I rode there and I jumped there and quite a few times, and I think I was 8 or 9, and I won the under 16 junior championship. When I was 12, Charlotte suggested to my mother and father that they perhaps took me overseas to train with Colonel Dudgeon. And this is in Ireland. Colonel Dudgeon had ridden for the Irish team on many occasions. I'm not sure, I think he'd probably captained the team. So I think it was about a month with Colonel Dudgeon. My father went back to England, my mother stayed there with me. It was incredible, it was an incredible experience. Anyway, that came to an end, and when we got back to South Africa, he wrote my mother a letter, and unfortunately over the years I've lost it, saying to her, if this child is not pushed and not overfaced, she'll be of international standing within 2 years. Now that puts me at 14 living in South Africa, so there wasn't much chance of that happening. So I rode and I jumped and I went to shows in Johannesburg and in Pietermaritzburg in the school holidays and things like that. So then as the years went by, I traveled, and Johnny Myburg, who lived in the Cape, used to travel with us. I started teaching at the age of about 17. My father decided that I better do a proper job, and there were stables that Johnny had, and she got married, she left and got married to George, and then my father said, "Okay, right, you take over, I'll take over these stables, I'll set you up, I'll pay everything for the first month, you're on your own." I ran those stables and taught from there, and I also was at home, but I wouldn't say I ran the stables at home because my mother was there as well with her show horses and things like that, but I was involved with it, obviously. But I ran that stable, it was only 12 stables. Then I started, as I said, I was going backwards and forwards to shows. My mother had the show horse that I said earlier that she'd done so well with. We used to drive up and down to Joburg, and then my father's health, as time went by, he had a lot of lung problems and heart problems, and he couldn't travel. So then I started to travel. And then I used to drive from here, and I used to leave at 6 in the evening. I used to take a keep awake pill, And I used to drive through at 100 miles an hour. That's how many kilometers an hour? I don't know.
It's over the speed limit.
Well over the speed, 100 miles an hour from here straight through to Joburg. There weren't bypasses in those days. You went through all those little towns. Only thing I used to go through night is to get there at about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning. Just put my foot down and go. And I was now then, what, 20? Somewhere around there, 21, 22, whatever it was. Younger even. And I used to, in those days, the army guys were given a pass sometimes for 48 hours to go and visit their parents and so on. And everything was so safe in those days. So I used to often stop and give a lift to an army guy, which was company, and which if I had a blowout or anything happened, I would have somebody with me. And I did that for a long time. I did that. I only moved to Johannesburg in 1972. So I did that for many years, backwards and forwards. And it was Bloemfontein Agricultural, and the Kimberley Agricultural, and the Welkom Show, and the Easter Show, Rand Easter Show, and the Pretoria Show, and the Pietermaritzburg Show, and then the Spring Show, which was held at Milner Park, and so it went on. I mean, it was about 8 or 9 shows a year. The Derby started in 1965. It was 1967 that Eldorado won, and I think we had a 3-way jump-off, because we all had 4 faults in the first round. We had a 3-way jump-off, and I was the fastest, and I won it. So that was my first Derby win. Then it was quite a long time. It was 1976, just the other way around. 1976 that I won it with Format, who was a very big grey warm blood, which I wasn't used to warm bloods. He'd been ridden by Springbok rider Peter Lavoie. It was owned by Peter's uncle, and unfortunately there was an upset in the family, and his uncle asked me if I would like to ride the horse, and yeah, I got the ride on the horse. Found the horse very difficult in the beginning. That must have been 73. I moved to Joburg, as I said earlier, in 72. I moved up in 72. It was about 73 that, by that time, when I moved up, Eldorado was retired, and Ratification, who was a very good horse, Ratification won the South African Championship. And he was a very, very good horse. So those 2 horses had come through with me, and then they were retired, and then came along Format. And I had another horse called Fly Ridge, which I bought, or my parents bought here in Cape Town, a while before we moved up. Format was ridden by Hans Winkler, who was one of the most famous German riders ever, and represented Germany, I suppose, 30 times or more. And then was sold, as I said, to Peter's uncle, and then unfortunately was that party of the ways. And that horse came to me in, I think, maybe the beginning of end of 73, 74. Then I was invited to ride at the Washington International Show. They invited the top leading riders in the world, the lady riders in the world. Format was a horse that was jumped by Hans Winkler, who was an absolute icon of show jumping in Germany. I mean, he must have represented Germany over 30 times. He was an amazing rider. He was world known. Annika was incredible. She was, I don't want to make too long a story of it, but she was owned in Bloemfontein and by a young rider. And then when I went down to teach, I used to go down to teach, Eugene Duplessis was her owner. When I used to go down to teach in Bloemfontein, I obviously saw the horses, and I said to him one day, I said, Eugene, that's such a stunning horse, do you want to sell it? He said, no. I think it was jumping in that time 120, 125, 130. He said, no, and I said, well, please give me first option on it. A couple of times later, when I went down, the Dr. Kutsia and his wife and his daughter Louisa came to fetch me at the airport, and they were very excited how they told me that they'd bought Honeygirl. And of course, I'm now sitting in the back of the car getting a lift and going to stay with them, and I was furious, but there was nothing I could do about it. Louisa went on to jump the horse. Louisa won the South African Junior Championships with the horse. I coached her all the time. I used to go down very often to Bloemfontein to coach. And I coached her through the horse's junior career right up to the South African Championship. Then she came up as an adult to the Rand Easter Show, and the horse went, okay. It had a couple of run-outs or stops. I had a very bad accident on Format, who banked a 6'6" wall with me, landed up with a broken collarbone and a sprained ankle. Ended up coming out of hospital. They stitched the whole thing up, and I came out of hospital in a wheelchair. I saw Honey Girl stop or run out with Louisa, and she was staying not very far from where I lived in Johannesburg, or Kyalami. So a young girl at that time who worked for me, Arena Devonish, she was working for me. So the evening that I saw Honey Girl have this problem, I said to my mother, my father had already passed away, I said to my mother, I want to go and try and buy Honey Girl. So anyway, and to my husband, Des, so they both agreed, yes, it would be a good idea. So I went, and it was pouring with rain, and I went in this damn wheelchair. Well, I went in the car down the road. They weren't staying very far away. Got out, sort of half a crutch, and hobbled across to the front door. Anyway, I tried to persuade them to sell the horse. They wouldn't sell the horse. Horse then went on to the Pietermaritzburg show, which was like 3 weeks later. It jumped okay. I then asked them again to sell the horse. No chance. Came back to Johannesburg, and I phoned them up and I said, look, I've got a very good horse, which was a B grade at that time, which is like a medium-classed horse. Louisa was about to go to university, and I said, look, your daughter's going to be very busy. She's down in Bloemfontein. She's going to be busy at Bloemfontein in university, and I've got a really nice horse which will get her on teams and so on. I don't think he's going to be the greatest world beater, but he's a really nice horse. You can have him. And I went to a friend of mine, Linda Kirschman, and I bought a young horse off the track from her, which she'd had off the track for a short while. And I said, I'll offer you these 2 horses, plus 100,000, I think it was, for which I didn't have. Neither did my mother have at the time, in cash, right, okay? Offer you this for this horse. So they still said no, and they hummed and hawed, and they no. And then all of a sudden, 10 o'clock at night, Dr. Duplessis phoned me up and he said, look, Gonda, we've considered, we've thought about it, you can have her. And Des got in the car at 4 o'clock the next morning. I get quite emotional about it. Got at 4 o'clock the next morning, drove down with the 2 horses to Bloemfontein, picked up Honey Girl and came back. And that's how I got Honey Girl. So it's quite an emotional sort of thing, because I'd tried for so long to get her. And then she was fantastic. She was an amazing horse. Unfortunately, you had to go very, very fast with her in a jump off, because she used to leave so much time in the air. I mean, she used to jump very high over jumps. I worked a lot on her to bring her down a little bit to her jump so she didn't over jump, because if a horse over jumps, it loses a little bit of stride on the landing and things like that. So, I had to ride her quite fast. But she was fantastic. She won the Derby in 79, and then she won it again in 80. And I think both times it was the only clear rounds. I've got an amazing video of her, like fly jumping into the last jump after the double of gates. Fly jumping like this into the last jump, and then like 3 strides out, the stride was there. And she was incredible to ride, incredible. Unfortunately, she injured herself and was out for over a year. And then she came back in and she injured herself again. In fact, this time she injured herself just offloading off the lorry. She slipped down the ramp, and so then we retired her. Yes, I did. I had a lot of bad luck. I had Isis Bridge twice ready for the Derby, and he was ill both times. I had Flaunt ready twice for the Derby, and he went lame just before the Derby. I mean, silly little lamenesses, out hacking and things like that. So there was quite a span of time that I actually didn't even ride in a Derby. But Watchfire was a very, very good horse. Watchfire I bought, Watchfire also off the track, racehorse, ex-racehorse. I bought him from a man called Martin Gilbert, who rode with me, brought Watchfire to me when he very first started with him, rode him up through the grades, and eventually I persuaded him to sell the horse to me, and I bought the horse and carried on from, I think it was C grade, on up into the top grades. He won the Derby, I think, with only clear. I was very focused, and I always wanted better, and I always wanted success and better success and more success than that. So now with my coaching, I find that I have the same thing. You know, it's like me doing it. When they go around a Derby and win a Derby, it's like I've done it. You know what I mean? Because I'm very Nicole and Nicola and my other pupils would probably say I'm very difficult and tough on them and so on, but I don't think I'm too tough. I just demand a lot.
Are you a softy at heart? Do you get nervous when you watch them?
No, maybe in a jump off of a Derby or something like that, yeah, a little bit. But no, I never had nerves myself. Ever, ever, ever. I never had a butterfly in my stomach once. But yeah, to go back to Derby, it's a very, very, very testing track. And you've got to be spot on. I mean, you've just got to have that little bit extra to go around a Derby.
Final question, looking back over all these years that you dominated at the top of the sport and with all your success, with all you've achieved, how do you feel about that? How proud? Is it you can look back and go, well, that was a life?
Very, very proud. And you know, the funny thing is that when I retired, I walked away, not from the sport, but away from that. Today, if I watch a video of myself jumping, I sit and look at it and I think, that was good. Oh, that was a nice ride. Almost like I'm watching somebody else. I just left it and moved to, I coached from the age of 17, but I just left that and moved to the coaching. And I love the coaching. I mean, I live in Cape Town now. I fly up every 10 days, 2 weeks. I spend 10 days up there coaching the guys, going to the major shows, and then come home for a break for a bit. I love it. I don't know, they're amazing animals. I mean, they just are amazing. I mean, they do so much for you. And it's not like a dog or a cat that's a pet. They're not a pet, but they're very close to you. So I don't actually know how to explain it. They can't be pets because they're big anyway. But they're just very special. I mean, you get such a rapport with a horse. I mean, it just, you know, and very often if you've had a horse for quite a long time, you'll find when you come to stables, they'll give a little neigh or they'll look for you when you come into the stable yard. And I don't know, there's just something.
Winston, is that why you still do what you do? Does that get you up in the morning, the love for the horses?
Yeah. And the challenge with the horses and the riders. I mean, you know, I'm heading for 79 this year, so I don't know how much longer I'll be able to do it, but for as long as I can possibly do it, I'll go on.
I'm happy with it. After the mishap this morning, I'm happy with it. Had I had a good run this morning, I wouldn't have been happy with that. But I'm happy with it. It's, you know, he's not a very experienced horse, and to come here and jump at the games, I think he's done jolly well for me. When you're not riding your own horse, I cry for watchfire. Could go on my knees for watchfire and have it young.
Far, and she's clear! The first clear of the Derby, a great clear from the great Watchfire.